Waiving COVID vaccine patents, the EU says US President Joe Biden's proposal isn't practical. It argues exporting more doses is a faster way to help developing countries. Is this politically motivated, and what does it mean for millions of people waiting to get their shots? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. Almost everyone agrees one way to beat the pandemic is to increase global vaccine production. But world leaders differ on how to give more access to poor nations that lack doses. The US has supported suspending vaccine intellectual property rights. That could allow developing nations to acquire the knowledge needed to produce jabs locally. But some European leaders argue a patent waiver would not help boost supply. They insist making and sharing vaccines more quickly is the best way to do that. European nations say they have been generous in exporting vaccines to other nations, and they've called on the US to do its part.
Nous devons donc travailler à ce que ce vaccin soit un bien public mondial.
We should work towards the vaccine becoming a global public product. What does that mean? Firstly, producing more. That's why I'm calling directly on the United States to end the export ban on the vaccines, but also on the components of these vaccines, which is preventing production.
The idea is rejected by pharmaceutical companies who argue patent waivers could compromise the quality and safety of vaccines. It's also been opposed by Germany. That's home to BioNTech, the firm jointly holding a patent on mRNA technology with Pfizer. This is what the German Chancellor had to say.
I made it clear that I do not believe that giving away patents is the solution to make vaccines available to more people. I believe that we need the creativity and the power of innovation of those firms, and that is why I believe in a patent protection.
Calls have been growing for the patent waiver after supplies to poor countries were affected by India's COVID-19 crisis. The country is the world's main vaccine producer, but has been prioritizing doses for its own people after a devastating surge in infections. Along with South Africa, it led a push for the temporary waiver at the World Trade Organization last October. They are supported by at least 61 nations, while rich countries reject the initiative. Waiving patent rights means that any country that gets the scientific know-how could produce doses without having to worry about being sanctioned or fined. The WTO decision requires a unanimous vote by all 164 members for the measure to pass. 10 meetings have failed to reach a consensus, and negotiations are expected to take months. Let's bring in our guests in Barcelona. Jeffrey Lazarus, head of the Health Systems Research Group at Barcelona Institute for Global Health. In New Delhi, Rajeshwari Hariharan is an intellectual property lawyer. In Rabat, Azeddine Ibrahimi is director of the Medical Biotechnology Laboratory at Rabat Medical and Pharmacy School. Welcome to the program. Jeffrey, one would think that patent waiver was always going to be something people would be unanimous about. Why is this divide now?
I think this is more about politics than proper pandemic control. President Biden has had a real PR coup, showing solidarity around the world by offering to support a temporary waiver in the patents. Now, we need to remember that Moderna already back in October 2020 said that they would not enforce patent control, and no country has picked that up. So I think it's really more about the EU and the US battling it out a little bit than it is about making a change in the short or medium term, because it will take a while to increase production, if we can even increase production in the countries that decide to take advantage of the patent waivers.
Rajeshwari, this is an extraordinary moment, and therefore the need for extraordinary measures. And one of the measures now proposed by the Americans is the patent waiver. From a legal perspective, how delicate is this as a task?
So this patent waiver is a very important aspect because while India is one of the chief producers of vaccines, one of the hurdles that our manufacturers are facing is the intellectual property rights, especially with regard to the patents. So because of the existence of patents, there are many manufacturers who are hesitant to produce the vaccine. So if there is a patent waiver, it will encourage a number of manufacturers to come up with these vaccines. There is a lot of discussion that the patent waiver by itself may not help, because who will give you the technology and who will give you the know-how? So as an intellectual property lawyer, I would say that you would need both. You would need to have a patent waiver, and additionally, if you get the know-how, in fact, the cell lines, as well as the raw materials, in this pandemic, it will be very, very, very
okay.
useful. And it is true that only the patent is not the hurdle. There are regulatory hurdles. There are various other hurdles. But the intellectual property rights are a very important hurdle.
Okay. Azeddine, I would assume that Morocco is in favor of waiving intellectual property protections. What does it mean for a country like Morocco?
It's very important for Morocco for a simple reason, actually. And I think for all the African countries, most likely this soap opera, I will call it this way, because you have greed, you have money, you have all the ingredients for a soap opera. But you said something very important, Hashem, in the beginning. You said that if one country will oppose in the WTO this decision, that's it. It will not go through. So we can see that it's not going to go through. But I think for our countries, what is important is just to set a precedent, saying in a time of crisis, it's really, we have to have some kind of measure like that. So when I look to Africa, where less than 1% of the population gets vaccine, I think we have two choices. Either we accept that or to fight to get some vaccines to Africa. The way to do it is to say that we cannot obey the rules of the patent and we want a patent waiver. And that's what did South Africa with India and other countries. That pushed actually the discussion between the bloc in Europe and the rich countries. And then in the beginning, I have to remind everybody that they were opposed to that, but Biden decided by the end to go for the waiver. And when you go to Europe, actually, when you look at the countries opposing it, they don't have the same reasons. Actually, Germany is opposing it because it has two companies, CureVac and BioNTech, they are producing, and they didn't get their money back. On the other hand, when you listen to what Macron said, he wasn't really opposed to it, but he's saying, give us the ingredients because they have the know-how to do it. So you can see that everybody is trying to get something out of it, but the reality is here.
And this is exactly where the lines get blurred. Jeffrey, as Azeddine was talking about the case of Germany. Now, when you listen to Angela Merkel saying that the patent waivers would dampen the entrepreneurial innovation spirit, is she genuinely acting on that spirit or just trying to protect BioNTech?
I think she's trying to protect BioNTech because the companies develop these vaccines with a lot of public support, and I don't see any reason why this would stifle innovation. We're talking about a possible temporary waiver during a global crisis in order to help the poorest countries. You have to remember that Oxford developed their vaccine and then partnered with AstraZeneca. Pfizer received hundreds of millions of dollars in public support. So pharmaceutical companies will always importantly be able to continue to innovate. I think this is really a show of solidarity. And like I said earlier, we've already seen one patent from Moderna not being enforced, and nothing has really changed.
Rajeshwari, it's almost like a David versus Goliath. When poor nations would go to the World Trade Organization, they would say, we need it, it will save lives. But then the Goliath would reply back saying that, you know what, this is not going to be a magic bullet. It's going to be a long way for you to acquire all the know-how, infrastructure to be able to manufacture a vaccine. So how is it going to work out there at the World Trade Organization, do you think?
Yeah, so as far as the WTO is concerned, yeah, they're right. There's going to be a long, winded bunch of negotiations. Actually, even the US companies know very well that this is a long, winded negotiation, and whether it will actually fructify or not, Nobody knows about it. Because of that, I think that's one of the reasons why they have said, yes, we completely agree and we shall waive all the patents. So that will have to be seen how it works out, because just making an announcement is only lip service. See, let's be very clear about this. The platforms which all these vaccines are using are common knowledge, platforms. So what the companies are trying to protect, or what Europe is trying to protect, or even US or otherwise, they're all trying to protect is that, look, I've got intellectual property rights, they are my rights, and I want to protect them. That's very well. But today, when we have a pandemic, they got to be generous, and they have to come out to say that, all right, at least for the period of the pandemic, we want as many people to use the vaccine, to use the technology, and to make it. US has got 200 or more agreements with various companies to make the vaccine. So why can't they do that in the rest of the world? So it's only that question.
Okay.
So as far as WHO is concerned, yes, it's going to take some time because we need to have consensus of various countries.
Azeddine, because since we started the show about COVID a year ago, the debate has always been about this disconnect between what the health community is aspiring to achieve and what the politicians are bogged down trying to work out. And this is why I'm trying to ask you this question. What do you think should come first now, the patent waiver or lifting of the export restrictions that countries like the UK and the US have been imposing for quite some time that would allow for more doses to be flown to different countries immediately for people to be vaccinated?
Well, we'd like in poor countries actually to have both of them. I think it will be great. But I think for the short term, we'd love actually to see the US and actually Britain giving up a lot of doses, because I think the situation in their countries is much better, and I think they could afford to do that. When you see in the US, you have 70 million actually doses of AstraZeneca that they don't need, and they are not going to use them, but they are just piling them. I think they should give them up. And middle term or long term, I think it's very good to set up a precedent saying when there is a crisis and a pandemic, everybody, there is no place for patent, because when you talk about patent, you are talking about money. And we have an antecedent of that. People forget that in the 90s, we had the same problem when South Africa actually decided to waive or to break down the patent for the drugs against AIDS, actually, the three therapy. And I think it was very important that this question will come back every time. But for us, I think in countries like Morocco, we'd love to see both of them happening.
Jeffrey, how do you respond to those who say they are pretty much concerned, basically in the US, that a patent waiver could end up in transferring some crucial, critical, sensitive technological information to countries that should not have it, particularly China and Russia?
I'm not so concerned about that. So Moderna isn't enforcing the patent as mentioned, but importantly, countries have already made, or high-income countries have already purchased the doses that they need, in some cases many times over. COVAX has purchased a large percentage of the doses they're going to need. So I think this is really an issue about allowing the vaccines to be exported, allowing the components to be exported, and if other countries, acquire the ability to produce mRNA vaccines, I think that's just a better situation for the world.
Rajeshwari, India itself is a remarkable case, the biggest producer of pharmaceutical products, suddenly bogged down with the COVID-19 infections. It's desperate for first of all, the lifting of the exports that was imposed by the Americans, desperate for the patent waivers. What is it going to make for a country like India? Do you see a potential for a speedy recovery if the patent waiver is established?
Yes, if the patent waiver is managed, it will actually really help a lot. Though, of course, it's just one of the entire components, it's just one of the pieces in the entire play. So a patent waiver will certainly help. The Supreme Court of India is also considering this, and the Supreme Court of India has asked the government to consider the use of tools like compulsory license. So the government of India is very seriously looking at it. So therefore, independent of what happens at the WTO, the nations by themselves have the power under the Patents Act to sidestep the patent for the period of the pandemic and permit other companies to manufacture the vaccines or the drugs, as the case may be, and avert the pandemic. So I think those are the steps that we need to take, because we all need to understand that if India is fine, if all the countries are fine, it's only then that the world will be fine. What should we do with the patents if there are no people to use those patents?
Okay. Azeddine, let's be realistic here. When we say that the patent waiver is a good thing, in practical terms, let's assume the waiver takes place tomorrow. How much time will it take a country like Morocco to establish the manufacturing capacity and the supply chain to be able to deliver the vaccine on time for the people needing the vaccination?
Well, that's a great question, Hashem. I think what Jeffrey said is true, because Moderna is not enforcing its patent rights, but none of the countries, the 60 countries that we are trying to break the waiver, are actually doing or manufacturing vaccine. I think in these 60 countries, there is two kinds of countries. There is South Africa, India, and a couple of other countries that they have the know-how and the capability of doing it, and they are pushing actually because they can do it right now. But I think countries like Morocco and others, it will take time to do it. But I think we want to have this kind of precedent, because it's great to have it. Because if we have another pandemic or epidemic, local epidemic, we could be able actually to use it and to be able actually to manufacture this kind of therapies.
Jeffrey, sometimes we tend to simplify things just for the sake of conveying the message. But when it comes to the patent waiver, the industry itself is not just about that. It's about the plastic bags, the filters, the cell culture media, the lipid nanoparticles, the microcarriers. You're talking about a set of sophisticated, highly developed things that you have to put together to be able to manufacture a vaccine. When it comes to those details, how are you going to go around them to be able to say, you know what, I am willing and I will do it on time for all the people?
That's exactly right. This is more than the precedent about a patent waiver. This is a wake-up call to the world that in an emergency during a pandemic, we are unable to produce the number of doses of a vaccine that we need to for a whole variety of reasons, including acquiring all of those necessary components that you just listed out, as well as the factories that can finish and fill, including the ability to store the mRNA vaccines at very low temperatures in countries that don't have that kind of large-scale refrigeration capacity. So this is, I think this is going to serve as the wake-up call to the world that we need to do something about vaccine production. The companies that have the technology aren't able to produce the doses fast enough. And I haven't at least heard that there's been rejections of offers for voluntary licensing. I mean, countries are simply not able to produce the vaccines, and I'm not sure that the patent waiver will really make the difference. The world needs to come together and say, stop blocking the export of necessary components, stop blocking the export of vaccines. I just saw an advertisement for New York that said, tourists are welcome to get vaccinated at their favorite sites. Clearly, there are enough available doses in the US. Those doses need to get to India, Brazil, and other countries that need them.
Rajeshwari, sometimes, unfortunately, you have to play by the rules of the international game. But my question is this: is it right for any country, just because it's rich, to scoop up all the contracts when it comes to the vaccines, when their neighbors just next door are dying because they don't have any access whatsoever to a jab?
Yeah, I think it's just unfair, and that absolutely does not justify anything at all. Patents are not justified at all in this at all, not at all, and it cannot be justified by any standard. There is a standard argument which Big Pharma and other companies have that we've invested so much of time, energy in research, and we developed this technology not just to give it away. And there is a lot of know-how that we so carefully developed. But that's a myth, because all of this technology which they think they have developed, it's not that they've developed a new thing at all. There is a lot of material which is available in the public domain. So patent waiver really would mean that, yes, we can produce it immediately. But if there are technologies that are available, so for example, in India, we already have certain technologies. We can always use them and produce the vaccine.
Azeddine, you get also this argument advanced by many experts who will tell you that, you know what, countries in Africa, for example, are way behind when it comes to the messenger RNA technology. And therefore, if we are to sort of go for a patent waiver, there's absolutely no way they will be able to acquire the skills, the technology they need to be able to manufacture particularly something similar to the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines.
Well, I think for the basic technology, Hashem, it's quite simple actually to do this kind of things. Even a bachelor degree students could understand this kind of technology and put them. But I think the proof of concept and the upscaling to the manufacturing position will be difficult for these countries. But we should start, I think, for the post-COVID. I'm not talking for countries in Africa right now. I think it will be difficult to have it right now. But I think it's something that we have to start right now. Maybe the pandemic will be longer for a simple reason, and just talked about it. Because if we keep out the African countries from getting the vaccine, we saw what's happening in India. We'll get variants. And if we get variant that will escape the immunity, all the world and all this country will be playing catch-22 and will come back to square zero and we'll get back to another pandemic. So I think these countries should really think twice before limiting access to these countries to the vaccines.
Jeffrey, for the time being, what would be the earliest to see an additional capacity flowing into the global market if we start with patent waivers? And bear in mind that we're dealing with new mutations and new variants coming into different parts of the world. Do you think that 2022 would be the ideal time frame for the capacity to be expanded?
Well, the ideal time frame is right now, but I think 2022 is when we'd realistically see it kicking in. And right now, you know, as was just mentioned, there are two big issues. One is the issue of variants of concern that are emerging, like the recent declaration in the UK of the Indian variant being a declaration of concern. And then there's the ongoing human tragedy. So I think the world, rather than discussing and focusing so much on a patent waiver that will be many, many months under negotiation, needs to look at how we can scale up the production. Why aren't we able to scale up production faster?
Rajeshwari, less than a minute, if you don't mind. How do you respond to those who will tell you that the patent waiver is not going to work for the simple reason everyone who has cash is concerned this could set a precedent beyond vaccines? So they'd rather see it dead now instead of being replicated across different sections of the world economy.
So even though companies are cash-starved, there is always support from the government. So if there is support from the government and the public sector, so it's always been possible for us to produce the vaccine. So the question that, because the companies are not prepared or they don't have the sufficient finances or the infrastructure, that's absolutely incorrect. Our companies here in India would definitely be certainly prepared to produce the vaccine. I would say that if there is a patent waiver, it will certainly help them a lot.
Well, Jeffrey, Lazarus, Rajeshwari, Hariharan, and Azeddine Ibrahimi, I really appreciate your insight. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution to the program. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.